I've been hiking alone for 6 years. I've slept on mountainsides and rainstorms. I've crossed rivers in the dark. I thought I knew what fear felt like out there. I was wrong. It was late September, somewhere in the Allegheny National Forest. I'd started the trail at noon, but took a wrong turn near mile marker 9, and by the time I realized my mistake, the light was already dying. I set up my tent in a small clearing off the main path. Not ideal, but dry ground was dry ground. I made dinner, checked my map one last time, and crawled inside my sleeping bag around 9. I fell asleep fast. I woke up at 2:47 in the morning. I know the exact time because I checked my watch immediately, the way you do when something pulls you out of sleep and you can't explain what it was. The forest was quiet. Not peaceful quiet, empty quiet. That specific silence where you realize the crickets have stopped and the wind has stopped and everything that was alive a moment ago is gone still. I lay there without moving. Then I heard it. Breathing. Not wind, not an animal sniffing. Breathing. Slow, controlled, deliberate breathing, maybe 8 feet from the side of my tent. Long inhale, long exhale. The kind of breathing a person does when they're trying to stay calm or when they're waiting. I didn't move for what felt like 20 minutes. I just listened. The breathing didn't change rhythm. It didn't get closer. It didn't go away. It just stayed there, steady and patient, like whatever was making that sound had nowhere else to be. I had a small folded knife clipped to my pack. I reached for it in the dark, moving my hand as slowly as I could, terrified that the sound of a zipper or the rustle of nylon would change whatever was happening outside. I got the knife. I held it. It felt very small. Around 3:30, the breathing stopped. I didn't sleep again. When the sky started going gray, I unzipped my tent and stepped out into the cold and looked around the clearing. The ground around my tent was soft from a rain 2 days before. There were no footprints. There were no marks at all. Just a ring of mud with my tent in the middle, completely undisturbed. I packed up in 8 minutes and hiked out without stopping. I've been back to that forest twice since then. Both times I made sure I was off the trail before dark. Both times, just before I fell asleep, I found myself listening for that rhythm. Inhale, exhale, patient and slow, like it was still waiting somewhere out there in the trees, and it had all the time in the world. I still don't know what made that sound. What bothers me most isn't the not knowing, it's that the breathing never sounded scared. It sounded comfortable, like it belonged there in the dark next to my tent, and I was the one who didn't.
The Colorado Trail is one of the most beautiful hikes in the country. I've done sections of it 3 times. The second time I was with my friend Dana. We were 2 days into a 5-day stretch, camped near a creek at about 10,000 feet. It was the kind of night where the stars are so thick and bright it feels fake, like someone painted them there. We sat outside until 11, talking about nothing important. Then we put the fire out and went to sleep. Dana woke me up at some point after midnight. She was sitting upright in her sleeping bag, completely still, staring at the mesh window of the tent. I asked her what was wrong. She didn't answer for a long moment. Then she said very quietly, "Don't look." I looked. There was a woman standing at the edge of the tree line. She was maybe 50 feet away, just standing there, facing us. She wasn't moving. She wasn't carrying a light. She was wearing what looked like a long coat or maybe a dress. It was hard to tell in the dark, in that pale blue moonlight that makes everything look washed out and wrong. She was too far away to see her face clearly, but her head was turned in our direction. She wasn't a shadow. She wasn't a trick of the trees. She was a person, standing completely still in the middle of the wilderness at 1 in the morning. Dana grabbed my arm. Neither of us said anything. We watched her for a long time. She never moved, not once. Her shoulders didn't rise and fall. She didn't shift her weight. She didn't tilt her head. She just stood there at the edge of the woods like a post someone had driven into the ground, looking at our tent. After maybe 15 minutes, I called out, "Hello?" My voice sounded ridiculous, small and breakable against all that open dark. No response. The woman didn't move. We kept the flashlight on and swept it back and forth across that entire stretch of trees for 5 minutes. Nothing. No footsteps, no rustling, no retreating shadow, just the trees and the dark and the cold and the creek sound, like she had never been there at all. We spent the rest of the night sitting up in the tent with a knife between us and the flashlight on. We broke camp at first light. We never talked about finishing the section. We just walked back to the trailhead and drove home in near silence. I've thought about that night every week since it happened. I've tried every reasonable explanation I know of. I've told myself it was a sleepy illusion, a shared hallucination from altitude, a trick of shadow and moonlight. But Dana and I both saw the same thing at the same moment. We both watched her for the same amount of time. We both felt the same drop in our stomachs when the flashlight hit empty space. There was someone standing there, and then there wasn't. That's all I know.
This one I've only told to 3 people because it sounds unbelievable and I hate how it makes me sound, but it happened. I was there. I was solo hiking in the Cascade Range, a route I'd done before in sections, but never in full. It was early July. The snow had just pulled back from the higher elevations and the trails were muddy and soft. On the 3rd morning, I went off route to circle a ridge and look at a viewpoint my friend had mentioned. There was no marked trail to it, just a description and a rough compass bearing. I came around a rock outcrop and found a door. Not a building, not a structure, a door. A single wooden door, maybe 7 feet tall, installed in a narrow vertical crack in the rock face. The rock on either side was solid granite. The door was old, dark wood, grain cracked and swollen from years of freeze and thaw, fitted with a black iron handle that had gone rusty orange. It had no hinges visible from the front. It had no frame exactly. It just filled the crack the way a tooth fills a socket. Tight and deliberate, like something had been placed there very carefully a very long time ago. There were no footprints around it except mine. The ground in front of it was clear. There was no sign on it. There was no indication of what was on the other side, and I couldn't see through the crack around the edges because the wood had expanded to fill it completely. I stood there for a while. I'm not sure how long. I remember feeling deeply unwilling to touch the handle. Not afraid exactly, just profoundly unwilling, the way you feel when something in you is certain without knowing why. I walked around the rock formation. On the other side, there was no crack, no door, no opening of any kind. Solid granite. The door had no other side, or the other side was somewhere else entirely. I took several photos. When I got home and went to look at them, every photo from that section of the hike came out overexposed, white, like I'd pointed the lens directly at the sun. Only the photos from before and after that outcrop came out normally. I have no explanation for the door. I've searched old records, asked local rangers, posted in hiking forums. No one has heard of it. No one has seen it. I haven't gone back. There's a part of me that wonders what would have happened if I'd turned that handle. A larger part of me is glad I didn't. The largest part of me, the part I try not to listen to late at night, believes that the door wasn't there by accident. It was waiting, and it was waiting specifically for the kind of person who wanders off trail alone and doesn't tell anyone where they're going. I want to be careful how I tell this because I don't want it to sound supernatural when what made it so terrifying was how ordinary everything felt right up until it wasn't. I was on a ridge trail in the Smoky Mountains on a Thursday in late October, midweek, so the trail was almost empty. I'd passed 2 people going the other direction around noon. By 4 o'clock, I hadn't seen anyone for hours. The sky was going that particular gray-purple color it turns in autumn when the light is leaving but hasn't left yet. I stopped to rest on a flat rock above a valley and drink some water. Below me was a wide slope of yellow and orange trees, totally still. I sat there for about 10 minutes, and then I noticed something. Directly below me on the slope, about 200 feet down, there was a figure, a person, standing still, facing the valley. At first, I didn't think anything of it. Hikers stopped to look at views all the time. But then I noticed that the figure was wearing what looked like the same colored jacket as me, dark green. Not uncommon. I raised my water bottle and drank from it. The figure below raised something to its face. I lowered my water bottle. The figure lowered its hand. I told myself it was coincidence. Parallel movements, similar timing, the way you're always looking for patterns. I stood up and stretched, raising both arms above my head. The figure below raised both arms above its head. My heart went cold. I sat back down. The figure sat down. Not with a delay, not after a moment, simultaneously, as if it were watching me through something I couldn't see and matching me in real time. I stood up suddenly, took 3 steps to my left, and stopped. The figure stood, took steps in the same direction, and stopped. I started walking fast down the trail, back the way I'd come. I didn't look behind me for a long time. When I finally did, the slope below was empty. No figure, no movement, just the trees going dark as the last of the light left the sky. I made it back to the trailhead well after dark. I sat in my car for a long time before I drove. Here's the thing that I keep returning to. I was alone on that trail. The slope below me was steep and covered in dense brush. There was no lower trail, no maintained path that would have put another hiker in that position. To be where that figure was, someone would have had to push through heavy undergrowth for at least half a mile from the nearest access point. Whatever was on that slope, it was not on its way somewhere. It was not passing through. It was there because I was there, and when I left, it had no reason to stay.
My father taught me to hike. He also taught me that if you ever smell something sweet and wrong in the deep woods, you get yourself back to the trail and you move fast. He never told me why. He said his father told him the same thing and never explained it either. I thought it was just old superstition until the summer I turned 28. I was on a solo backpacking trip in northern Minnesota near the Boundary Waters. Dense boreal forests, no cell service, no other hikers for miles. I was 2 days in and feeling good, confident. The kind of confidence that wilderness gives you when everything has gone right for long enough. It was late afternoon when I went off trail to find a water source my map showed a quarter mile to the east. The forest in there was dark, even in daylight. The trees grew close and the ground was soft with moss, and the light came down in thin columns. I was watching my footing and not much else. Then I smelled it. Sweet, heavy, not flowers, not anything I could name exactly. It was the smell of something overripe, or of something trying to smell like something overripe, too sweet, wrong sweet, like a smell that was pretending to be pleasant. I stopped walking immediately. My father's voice in my head from 20 years ago, get back to the trail, move fast. I turned around and started back toward where I'd come from. I was not running, I was walking quickly with purpose, the way you walk when you want to move fast without making noise. I don't know why the noise felt important, it just did. I had gone maybe 100 steps when I heard movement in the trees to my left, parallel to me, pacing me. Not a deer. Deer crash and stop and change direction. This was steady and deliberate, moving at exactly the same speed I was moving, tracking me through the trees without trying to close the distance, just keeping pace. I sped up. The movement sped up. I slowed down. The movement slowed down. I did not look at it. I have thought about this many times since, and I genuinely cannot explain why I didn't look. Some part of me was deeply, primitively certain that looking would change what was happening in a way I couldn't recover from. So I kept my eyes on the ground in front of me, and I walked. The pacing movement stayed with me for about 4 minutes. Then it stopped. I didn't stop. I kept walking until I hit the main trail, and then I walked for another mile before I finally stopped and turned around. The forest behind me was empty and quiet and normal. I found water at a different source and set up camp in a clearing with very long sight lines in every direction. I didn't sleep deeply. I kept waking and listening. The smell never came back. I told my father about it when I got home. He was quiet for a while. Then he said he'd had something similar happen once in the same general region of Minnesota 30 years before. I asked him what he thought it was. He said he didn't know. He said his father didn't know either. He said the important thing was that I didn't look. I asked him why not looking mattered. He said he didn't know that either, just that it always had.
The night before I started the most frightening hike of my life, I read an article about how people go missing in national parks. Not the statistics, I'd read those before. This article was about the patterns, how many disappearances happened within a half-mile of the trail, how quickly an experienced hiker can become disoriented, how often the missing person's gear is found intact and undamaged. I thought about that article 3 days later, alone in the dark, watching a campfire burn in a valley I knew was empty. I was in the Ozark National Forest, Arkansas, a section of trail I'd chosen specifically because it sees very little traffic. I'd confirmed at the ranger station that no other permits had been issued for that stretch that week. No other hikers. I was the only person out there. On my second night, I set up camp on a ridgeline. The valley below me dropped maybe 300 feet. After dinner, I sat outside watching the stars and thinking about nothing in particular. It was around 10 when I noticed a light. At first, I thought it was a reflection, something off a wet rock or a piece of trail marker, but it was too warm a color for that. It was orange and flickering. It was a campfire, down in the valley floor, no more than a quarter mile away, burning low and steady. I watched it for a long time. I told myself there were explanations. Maybe the ranger had miscounted permits. Maybe someone came in from a different access point. Maybe it was just allowed fires in this section and someone hadn't told me. But I kept coming back to the shape of the light. It was a small fire, very controlled, not the large burning pile of a casual camper. It was the fire of someone who did not want to be noticed, and whoever had made it had set it up below the ridgeline where no one walking the main trail would see it, where I could only see it from above. I turned off my headlamp. I sat in the dark for an hour watching the fire. At no point did I see a silhouette around it or any movement at all. The fire just burned by itself in the empty valley, patient and quiet. Around 11, the fire went out. Not like it died down naturally. It went out all at once, like something had been placed over it. I had my tent zipped and both poles jammed through the fly loops before midnight. I lay there in the dark, listening to the valley. Around 2 in the morning, I heard footsteps on the trail below my camp, slow and deliberate. They passed without stopping, moving up the ridge and then away. I counted my own heartbeats. I got to 400 and something before I lost count. In the morning, there was no sign of a camp in the valley. No fire ring, no ash, no flattened grass. I walked through the area and found nothing. I hiked out that day instead of finishing my planned route. I told the ranger at the gate about the fire. He wrote it down in a notepad and nodded slowly and didn't seem surprised. He said they got reports like that from that valley occasionally. I asked him what he thought it was. He capped his pen and looked out at the tree line for a moment. Then he said the forest had been used for a lot of different things by a lot of different people over a very long time, and that some of those people were still out there, and that they didn't always want company. He said it like he was describing something he'd accepted, like it was just part of his job. I didn't ask him anything else.
I am a careful person. I make lists, I file flight plans, I always tell someone exactly where I'm going and when I expect to be back. I have never gotten seriously lost on a trail. I have never been hurt alone in the wilderness. I have done everything right every time for 15 years of solo hiking. None of that helped me in the White Mountains last fall. I was on a section of the Appalachian Trail in New Hampshire, 3 days into what was supposed to be a 5-day solo. The weather had been perfect, the trail was well marked, I knew the route. By the third evening, I was 12 miles from where I'd told my sister I'd be camping, which is normal. You adjust for conditions, for mood, for a better water source, or a more sheltered site. I set up camp around 6, made dinner, and was asleep by 9. I woke up at some point in the deep part of the night, that heavy darkness around 3 or 4 in the morning, because I heard my name. Specifically, I heard my own voice say my name, not someone calling me, my voice, the exact pitch and texture of my own voice saying my name from somewhere outside the tent, in the dark, conversational, not urgent, like I was just mentioning it, like I was reminding someone. I lay completely still. My brain went through every explanation it had. Dreaming, half-asleep hallucination, an animal making a sound that my sleeping mind shaped into language. I almost convinced myself. Then it happened again. Same voice, same tone. My name, spoken with that specific quality of sound that I've only ever heard coming out of my own mouth, a quality you can't hear in recordings of yourself, that only exists when the sound is moving directly from your own throat into the air. I cannot explain how I recognized it as my own. I just did, in the same way you'd recognize your own handwriting or your own footstep. I did not respond. I did not unzip the tent. I lay there until it was light enough to see the trees through the mesh window, and then I packed in the gray pre-dawn and started walking. I hiked 9 miles before I stopped to eat breakfast. I didn't put my pack down the entire time. I spent the rest of that day trying to explain what I'd heard. I've thought about it almost every day since. I've read about auditory hallucinations, about infrasound and forests, about the way the brain constructs sound from fragments. I've accepted every rational possibility. I've held each one up and examined it carefully. But here is what I keep returning to. I know my own voice. I have known it my whole life. And whatever spoke my name in the dark that night, in those mountains, in that cold, it knew my voice too. It knew it well enough to use it perfectly. And the only way to learn a voice that well is to spend a long time listening.